Okay, so most house plumbing is copper, generally speaking, unless you've got some plastic. It's not common, but it does happen. And so to fix a copper pipe, for whatever reason, either you need to make a new run or you have a leak or whatever, you will generally use a torch, which we've been using to do the wire for over there. You need the same ingredients, flux to make it flow, solder to make it stick, and a fitting. Oftentimes this pipe isn't too bad, it's pretty shiny, but when you're doing, especially if you look in your basement of an old house, you'll find that your copper is really tarnished, like it's almost brown, like totally brown. And that actually won't stick, solder won't stick to that, because there's a coating of grease and dust and grit on it, and it'll actually just fall, the solder will just fall right off. The other thing you want to make sure of is that your pipe is completely dry on the inside. Even a tiny bit of water in the pipe will cool the solder too quickly for it to stick. So the first step is to basically get the end of your pipe as bright and shiny as you possibly can. So that's pretty darn good. You can use sandpaper. They make special pipe brushes that'll do this job for you. And this does two things. One, it removes all the grit. Two, it faintly scores the pipe, just like we did with the wire, so that there's something for the solder to flow into and stick to. And then the second piece is to do the same. Even though this is a new fitting, it's completely smooth on the inside. And so if I put solder on this, it's just a smooth tube, and it won't stick. Or it will stick, but not very well. You might get a leak down the road. And again, they make brushes that are specifically designed to fit inside here, but a bit of sandpaper folded up works just as well. You don't have to score it a huge amount, but you definitely want there to be some lines, a little bit of stuff in there. And then, it's the hodgepodge way today, but they do also make brushes for flux. And you actually want to flux both pieces. Flux will actually dissolve copper, and so if you leave the flux on after you're done, and let's see, there's actually a bristle left in here from the last time I used this at home. That's from a flux brush. If you leave the flux on the pipe when you are done, you will eventually corrode the pipe. So once you've soldered your pipe, you will want to make sure that you wipe off the excess flux. So once you've got flux on both elements, stick them together, remove the pipe brush. For this one, unlike the class pipe, you actually want a fair bit of heat. And so the way that I like to do it generally is I like to try to get it right in the very end of the blue flame. And you actually want to heat the fitting side, and you want to make sure you do it evenly all around. And the nice thing about flux is that, or about solder, is that once it's hot, the heat of the pipe will actually pull the solder into it. And so it'll actually suck this right into the joint. There it goes. Hold on. And then you want to make sure that you get all the way around and do the bottom. You don't need much. The general rule of thumb is about 1/2 inch of solder for 1/2 inch of pipe. And I'm going to let that cool for a minute because it's hot. And so you can see that all the way around now I have this thin little edge of solder. And I actually didn't do that too badly. That actually looks pretty good. You don't want a gigantic blob on the bottom. If you have a gigantic blob on the bottom, it means you used too much solder. You also want it to look this sort of uniform, smooth, slightly dull silver color. If it's chunky or bubbly, it means that it cooled too quickly for one, or there wasn't enough flux for it to flow into the pipe for the other. But that is how you solder a copper pipe. So this joint is now water and pressure proof. So you could put this under pressure. You could also put water in this and it wouldn't leak. And so the solder gets pulled into the joint, into all those little grooves that we created, and it fills it up completely, and then when it cools, it's basically a solid metal, copper, in this case silver, tin metallurgy. So this is still hot enough that I can feel it through the gloves, but it'll cool down in not too long. And then, as I said, the last step, especially for plumbing, is to wipe off all the residual, and you can see there's actually a fair bit of burnt flux and other junk on the end of the pipe. So if you go in your basement and you look at your joints in your basement pipes, you will see on a lot of them that there's a lot of green corrosion. The ones that have more green corrosion have more flux that wasn't wiped off. The ones with less or no green corrosion have almost no flux. And you can sort of tell if it was a professional plumber or a journeyman or just Joe Handyman who did your plumbing by how corroded the pipes are. Because a professional plumber will wipe off almost all the flux. They're really good at it. Joe Handyman may forget to wipe off the flux or may not do a very good job of it. Another way that you can tell how much skill the plumber has is by how many drips there are, especially if the pipe is hanging like this. You can see solder, like if you look at my basement, there are definitely some of my joints where I was soldering at an angle, and so the solder ran down the pipe and then dripped off. Not all of them, but there's a few. So yeah, that's sticking copper together. This is a very strong joint. It's actually going to be really hard to remove this joint once it's together. Generally, you won't rework this. If you need to repair it, you'll just cut it off and throw it away, which is what I will do with this, unfortunately. Luckily, these pieces are cheap. 99 cents for that. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Alex.